It's time for my virtual Jericho with John Mayer.
Hello and welcome to another My Jericho, another My Virtual Jericho. This afternoon, we're going to go through a bit of history and a bit of the current. We're going to look at the history of Jericho's biggest employer, Lucy, who've now become Jericho's biggest private landlord. You probably don't know, but they own an awful lot of Jericho. So we'll explore that with two of the key men, Ian Ashcroft, who's the group property director of Lucy, and the architect of St Paul's House, which some of you know as the old health centre. Let's start off. Let's go back in time, shall we? Ian, welcome. I mean, I know
Thank you.
you're not a specialist in the history of Lucy. But let's start at the beginning. Let's look at where Lucy came from, because you've done this wonderful series of hoardings outside the Cranham Street building works, which Jesus showed you the way, didn't they? Can you explain why Jesus showed you the way?
I think you might be referring to a similar hoarding in the middle of in the middle of Oxford, I think on Cornmarket Street, isn't it, John? Where one of the university colleges had done something similar, and I did take a walk past that, and I thought that was a splendid idea. Give people an insight as to what you're doing, but also the history behind it.
And it tells the story of Jesus College's Northgate extension very, very well indeed. I mean, surely all building sites and new development should do something like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not cheap. That hoarding costs an awful lot to produce and design. But no, I think it's great, and we got a lot of pride when that first went up. And you saw people stopping and reading it and asking questions, and I got a lot of pride from that. And it's also, I think, it's less likely to be defaced. I would like to think. It's a bit of a shame that a big chunk of it blew over in the storm. So we're just redesigning some more sturdy footings, and then you'll see that the rest of the hoarding, which was on Cranham Street, will then go back up again.
What sort of feedback have you heard from the public about those hoardings?
Good. I think we assume everybody knows the history of Jericho, Lucy's and Jericho, but of course Jericho is quite a transient place. There are people coming and going all the time, and we've been as a manufacturer, we've been off this site since 2005. So it's nice that we can tell the history, make the connection with Jericho and the community that we operate in. And no, it's good. We also do the open doors as well, because our global headquarters is still here on Walton Street, and we've got this fascinating office with a wonderful archive of great photographs. So once a year we open that up too, and it's amazing how many people do want to come in and learn a bit more about the history of Jericho and the heritage. So no, the feedback's been great.
Now you actually give away a nice little book at the open doors, don't you? If people walk into your office in Walton Road, could they have a copy?
Absolutely, we've got lots of copies of that book. Yeah, the Lucy story. I'll be delighted to give them to anybody that's interested. It makes fascinating reading. It's not just about Lucy's and the connection to Jericho, although obviously that's a really important part of it. But it's also about the history of Jericho itself. It makes fascinating reading, whether you're interested in Lucy's as a company or not.
Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Way back in prehistory. Let's see the first of those hoardings, if we can. So it's a shared history over 200 years. The first slide, please. So there we are, 1825. It's the first time an Ironmonger shop was in St John in Walton Mill Road.
Yeah,
You set up.
yeah, I think 1825 is when the business moved to Jericho. I think that it's got this, the origins of Lucy apparently dates back to about 1760, but the business moved to Jericho in 1825 to a site that then became Eagle Works as it's now known. W. Lucy itself was apparently formed in 1897.
It's 197 years ago. What are you planning for your double centenary, or whatever the correct word is?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, but yes, there'll certainly be a big celebration.
Next slide, please. So here we are. This is when William Lucy joins
Yeah,
and changes his name, and the founders renamed it Eagle Works.
That's
You
right.
take
Yeah. I
take
don't
it from
think
there.
I don't think William Lucy, poor chap, actually lived very long. I think he died of tuberculosis as quite a young man. And yeah, it became Lucy and Co. in 1897. And as it says there, John Reed Dick joined as managing director in 1905. Now, John Reed Dick was a electrical engineer and had come down from Scotland, I believe. So that changed the course or the direction of the business away from just being a foundry towards what was going to be an emerging and booming century of electrical engineering. Now, John Reed Dick is, I think, the current chairman's grandfather. And we also have Richard Dick, who's the current chairman. His son is also now an executive director with the firm. So we've got 4 generations of the Dick family, which is terrific.
They're queuing up. Now, next slide, please. So there we are in the two wars. You supported the war effort. You made
We
bombs.
did,
You built switchgear, electrical engineering business, and you
we
put a
did.
weathervane on
Yeah, I
top of
think
the top.
during World War One, I understand that the factory was given over to manufacture of munitions and associated kit, and then and I think the business I don't think was particularly profitable during World War Two, but then we had a boom after World War Two when obviously the country was rebuilding itself.
Why were you never bombed by the Germans?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I
Because
really don't know
I
the
was
answer.
strategic importance. Next slide,
Yeah,
please. So there we are, 1954. You buy a block of house from St John's, and then a disused ink factory in Jackson Street, and then you Walton Mellors site you acquire from Hawley's the coal merchant. The Walton Mellors site is what's now Waterways, correct?
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And prior to that, and I think it's around about 1948 that we negotiated the purchase of the Eagle Ironworks, which I think is about a 3-acre site, from St John's. So St John's, even back in the day, didn't sell things very often. And according to the history books, I think we paid £40,000 for the Eagle Works site back in 1948 from the profits that were made from the business that year. And actually, shareholders reinvesting profits back into the business is a kind of fairly common theme, with the Dick family ownership over the years, be it through reinvesting back into research and development in the manufacturing business, or indeed reinvesting into the real estate around. So hence, us buying the freehold, but also buying other chunks of land, the bottom of Juxon Street, Walton Street, and the site over in Port Meadow. So I think by within about 10 years, the directors of Lucy's had gone from a 3-acre site to about 8 acres of owned manufacturing land in the middle of Jericho in a very short period of time, and that was all to aid the expansion of the factory.
Now there was a reason why you bought the house in Jackson Street. Have they shared the secret with you?
Well, my understanding is that a lot of the houses were bought around the factory to aid the expansion of the business. There were an awful lot of complaints around noise and pollution and dust. We did need to house some of our workers and our staff, but there was also a bigger picture, thinking that actually, if we took the properties and we put our own workers in them or rented them out, then we might be able to expand the business with fewer complaints. So yes, I'd like to think that it was purely around housing the workers, but I think there was a bigger picture there too.
Okay, the next slide, please. So there we are. You buy these houses from St John's College, and they've all got wonderfully long gardens. If you go to Cemetery, find out that, and they're all quite a lot of them are now student houses, aren't they?
No, this is a bit of a misconception that we have very few undergraduate students. If I'm absolutely honest, I don't think the students can afford the Jericho rents. Most of our properties nowadays, our demographic tends to be young, professional, postgraduate, research. We have a lot of shared properties. We're probably one of Oxford's biggest owners of houses in multiple occupation, which we invest heavily in. So we offer a service to a lot of our tenants where you can get 3 or 4 people living in a really nice, well maintained house, and it makes them affordable, but very few students.
So you carry on building and buying land. You buy Jackson Street and you build there.
Yep.
Next slide, please, if we can. So
Yeah, so in the 60s and the 70s, we bought a wharf down at the bottom of Jackson Street, and we bought the former ink factory from OUP. And the ink factory, I understand, was acquired so that we could knock down some houses to create another access into the rear of the factory. But the wharf site, which is now what's known as Castlewell House, I think it became apparent to the directors, even at a very early stage, that there was a great development potential there. So in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we were building, and we were building blocks of flats at the bottom of Jericho. And yes, we did pull down some houses, mostly, as I say, to facilitate better access into the factory. I mean, I remember coming to Oxford to do my A levels and walking down Walton Well Road, and it was quite a sinister place. This would have been back in the 80s. It wasn't a particularly inviting place. It's obviously completely different now and being gentrified, but a lot of our properties are period houses, and we spend and have spent a lot of time and effort and money over the years bringing our portfolio up to standard. And there's a significant amount of investment that's gone into the restoration of the houses on Jackson Street and Walton Well Road, and elsewhere in Oxford. And I'm proud that the likes of Oxford Preservation Trust, for instance, have recognised some of the work that we've done, and we've won awards and received recognition for the preservation work. But anybody that walks down Jackson Street, I personally think it's the nicest street in Jericho. You've got these lovely front gardens. And there's a really good feel about the street, and the same on Walton Well Road.
Let's take a step back. At its peak, how many people worked in the Eagle Works?
I think at its peak it was probably about 1,100. I mean, Lucy as a company now is bigger than it's ever been. We employ over 2,000 people around the world, and we have a turnover now of in excess of 200 million. So people think that Lucy is gone. We're still very much a manufacturing business. Our global headquarters are here on Walton Well Road. We have a factory in Tame. So we're still very much an Oxford-centric company, but we are a global business, and we have factories in the Middle East, in India, in South Africa, and South America, and further afield.
What do these factories do?
Well, the Lucy Group consists of Lucy Electric, Lucy Controls, and Lucy Real Estate. And the overseas factories are mostly Lucy Electric. So it's the manufacture and assembly of electrical switchgear products around the world. So we primarily sell into and manufacture in areas and in countries where there is significant infrastructure growth. So the Middle East has been a very good market for us over many decades. It's something that we are trying to become less reliant on, hence the investment in further afield in Thailand and in India, South America, and further afield.
So this is traffic lights and various electrical things to get electricity to the people. Is that what you provide?
We make switchgear products. I suppose if I were to ask somebody to go into their where the incoming mains comes into their house, you might see a little cutout, a little black box, which has got a Lucy stamp on it. That's one of the products that we manufacture. In my village, if I were to go to the village green, you might see a big oil ring main unit with one of those grey palisade fences around it humming away. If you look at that, hopefully that's got Lucy of Oxford stamped on it. We make street lighting and very, very sophisticated electrical switchgear products, and we're also investing heavily in EV charging and infrastructure.
Back to property. How many houses and flats do you own or control in Jericho?
We own just over 350 houses and flats in the city. The majority of those are in Jericho. We also have some commercial property assets. So next to our office here is Eagle House, and that's an office block that's rented to Oxford University, and we own some other commercial buildings and a little bit of agricultural land as well. We've also got some car parks. We've got an underground and above ground car parks in Jericho too. So we've got, I think, a little over 700 tenants living in our houses and flats. And we look after them ourselves. We don't use any agents because we want to control the service and the experience that our tenants have by not having a middleman. So, if you're one of our tenants, you'll be looked after by our directly employed maintenance team. You'll have your own property manager. You're not dealing with an agent and then a remote landlord. You just come into the office and speak to the person who'll look after you, and it's a service that I think is unrivaled, which is why we're fortunate enough to operate about 98.5%, 99% occupancy. People like to be treated properly and with respect and professionalism, and that's what we try to achieve.
So your office, the Cranham Terrace, is that's where whose maintenance men are based there, are they?
That's where our maintenance team are. Yeah, and we have a small store there. But that's where our maintenance guys are centered, and yeah, it's right in the heart of the estate. It's perfect.
So are you Oxford's biggest private landlord?
I think outside the university, I'm not quite sure where we are with OUP. We're always adding to our organic growth, but yes, I think we are probably Oxford's biggest private landlord outside the university. Yeah, and with that comes a huge amount of responsibility. We are, I think, one of Oxford's biggest private HMO landlords, so we work very closely with Oxford City Council and the licensing team, making sure that all our properties are completely compliant, and that there are ongoing maintenance and repair schedules and the like. So yeah, we are blessed. We're very lucky in that we can create and maintain communities. When you're fortunate enough to own a whole street like Walton Road or Juxon Street, you can create communities, special places for people to live, and we do take that very seriously, and we continue to invest in our property stock, but we also are looking forward to the next 10 years. One of our biggest challenges, of course, is going to be around sustainability. When you own a portfolio that is predominantly in conservation areas and quite often listed, and you want to move forward to the end of this decade, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to get the property stock up to the sort of sustainable levels that we aspire to? That is quite a challenge, and one that we're going to be looking at over the next year to 2 years.
Let's go back to the slides if we can, and the development of Eagle House. So then you started to close down, obviously, the factory, and then if we could have the next slide, please. You developed it into with Berkeley Homes. You developed the thing beside the canal, which right. I think is rather nice.
Thank you.
How many flats? How many flat apartments are there?
On Eagle Works, there's 188 apartments, and that was quite a planning challenge. We got planning permission in 2001, and I joined by that point, and I remember the going to Oxford City Council planning committee meetings and getting rebuffed, and having to go back to the drawing board and redesign. But eventually we got planning permission in 2001. We signed a joint development agreement with Berkeley Homes, whereby we retained ownership of the land, and we jointly designed the scheme, and then Barclays built it. It was hugely successful, I have to say, and the timing was very fortuitous. I think we sold the last unit in 2007, which of course, and then 2008 there was the crash. So the timing was absolutely perfect. And yes, we moved out in, I think it was 2005, when manufacturing ceased at in Jericho and moved over to Tame. But again, I'm biased. I come down the canal or I walk down onto the piazza, and I think Eagle Works is the best development in Oxford. You know, it's got a very special feel to it. It feels quiet, it feels tranquil, and yet you're right in the middle of town. And yeah, we're very pleased, and indeed we still own the freehold, and we invested in a number of the apartments on the development ourselves as well.
Let me ask you three mastermind questions. Who are the two most famous residents of Eagle Works, past and present?
Well, you've got Mr. Dawkins. I'm guessing, and there was we used to have Baroness. Oh my goodness,
P.D. James.
P.D. James. Thank you.
P.D. James,
Yeah,
the writer.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
she had an apartment there.
She did.
The second mastermind question is what price is the most expensive apartment in the Eagle Works gone for? What's the record price?
I really don't know the answer to that because prices change all the time. But I know the penthouses, when they do come up for sale, are very sought after, and they rarely come up. And I should imagine it's well over £1 million.
Yeah, north of a million. So, so you're proud of that, and the place next door you developed as well. If you can see the next slide, please. So here we are. You've changed your name. You read about the Eagle Works site,
Yep.
and there's why are those women outside the flower shop? By the way, what's the significance of that?
I don't know. It's just they're all part of Jericho. That's what makes Jericho such a vibrant place.
Okay, and next slide, please. Which is probably the last one. Which is so you started St Paul's House, and these are all the things you contribute in the community. You're seen as a very active uh, corporate member of the community. You contribute to lots of things. Perhaps you'd tell us about some of those.
Yeah, we certainly try to. You know, Richard Dick, our chairman, you know, has always had a social conscience. He was a High Sheriff of Oxfordshire for a year and focused during his tenure very much on youth charities. But we do there's a variety of causes and that we support it. And for us personally in real estate, we do try to look at homelessness charities, but also, you know, things that we can do in the community itself. So again, I think we are going to be sponsoring the Oxford Canal Festival that I think is coming up in September. And there are other local charities that we support as well. They're all on the board. And yeah, and again, anybody that has a local interest, a local cause, you know, our door is always open. And you know, if you want to come in and talk, and if we can help on a local level, then we'd be delighted to do so.
Proposal for my Jericho will be in your in tray after this. Now, you've actually developed part of Jericho Canal side very well. But have you thought of moving a bit further along about the boatyard, the series of mud that's called the boatyard? Have you thought about developing that?
We've been approached on a number of occasions. I think yeah, that's that's a tricky path, and several developers, as we know over the years, have failed
Four,
to
I think. I think it's 4-0 at the moment, isn't it?
yeah,
Yes.
I think some people paid an awful lot of money for it. And yes, I think it's been the cause of demise of at least one. Look, I think that for us, the reality is that we always knew that was going to be a challenging site. It is a great location, and it's it's terrible to see. It's still boarded up, and nothing happening. It will come alive. There are a lot of stakeholders on that site, and that's always going to be a challenge. And there's always going to be a lot of public scrutiny too. For us personally, we had other projects to look at. St Paul's House. We bought that in 2015, and it's taken me and my team 5 years to assemble that and get planning permission and get all the stakeholders on board. And we've also redeveloped and extended some of the other blocks of flats at the bottom of Jackson Street. That was enough, I think.
Oh, I was
We wanted.
just before we get away from them, but have you thought of, let's have a dream that you actually have Jericho Canal side that goes all the way from Worcester College, all the way right to you. You actually take over college cruisers, you create a whole canal side there. How about that?
Yeah, well, that would be a lovely vision, but we're quite content with what we've got, and the projects that we're looking at. As I say, we've got a big sustainability program ahead of us. I want to deliver, some Paul's House, and I want to deliver that scheme so that everybody can be proud of it. And we're also looking at other projects on land that we own in Jericho. So yeah, we we have ambitions, but we don't have ambitions to take over the whole of Jericho.
All right, and you brought up the subject of St Paul's House, Paul Southouse. It's your baby now. You're the architect. Your name's on the tin. What? How did this all start? What was it when you became involved?
Well, good evening, John, and thanks for having us on. It's a real pleasure. When did it all start? Well, as Ian said, in 2015, that's when it started. I before we sort of came on the broadcast, I went through a bit of a timeline, and yeah, from from it becoming an idea in 2015 to it being completed, it would have taken 8 years, and it's an incredible amount of time, really. And I just couldn't believe where the large gaps were, and where the negotiations were ongoing, and it's been a fascinating journey. So, does that answer your question?
Lucy bought the site in 2015, did they? And it was the old health centre, with some social housing council flats above it. And so, where did you come in, and what was your dream? How did you and they realise what it's going to be?
Well, we're very lucky to have worked with Lucy's for a number of years, and we came on very early in the conception of what is possible. So looking at lots of different options and how that could work out. So the first step is to really look at several options, which included demolishing the building and putting something else there. That at the very beginning of a project, you're looking at what are the costs involved for each of the options, and then finding out whether that's going to get planning permission. So there's a pre-app, and talking to the planning authority about what the proposal and whether that's acceptable. And I think after there's a general consensus that something could be done, that's when the negotiations started with Oxford City Council. Yeah.
What were the big parameters? What limited you, and what went around your dream that you couldn't break the barriers of?
Well, I think that first step, it is very important to retain the existing building, and that was born mainly from the tenure that Oxford City Council have 5 flats within it that are being refurbished, and they need to be delivered back at the end of the project. And in terms of the embodied energy within the building, it's the right thing to do and work with it. It's a bit of an eyesore within Walton Street, and the PVC windows, which were replaced, were really detract, and they draw attention to themselves and really detract from the street. When you go back to the original 1972 design, and there would have been timber windows.
We can see what it looked like before. Let's have a look at the first slide. There we are. That's what it was. Pretty, eh?
No, exactly. So, I mean, the things that dominate to me are the bay windows, which project as large white elements into the street. There's a large area which is I get it, it's not very active. So you've got the corner entrance into the health centre, but other than that, there's one entrance into St Paul's House itself, to the flats above, further along. But otherwise, it's very inactive, and Walton Street has lots of businesses within it. So one of the important things is to start to open that up. There are limitations within reusing the existing building. For example, further along towards the back of that photo, there's some stores within the building which have to be retained. That becomes a useful place to put the cycle storage, which is obviously lost when the development started. So
let's move on to the next slide if we can. So is this your vision of what it's going to be like?
It's part of the vision along the process, along the way. So it's replacing the bay windows with metal cladding and trying to get back some of the original design intent that was there from the 1972. So there's a square feature. There are square windows and square elements within it. It was a fascinating journey during planning in terms of involving the conservation officer and the planning officer in developing the design. We originally, as part of the plan application, there was a very sort of consistent line around the parapet at the top of the building, and the conservation officer was adamant that it must have a stronger corner. So they suggested lifting up the brickwork, which you can see above the bay there in the corner, and creating some variety and getting that verticality in the building, trying to break it up, and then matching that in the roof, so you can see the overhanging roof elements which jut forward and then set back.
Next slide, if you can, please. So there we are. Here's your drawing of what it's going to be. Can you talk us through that, please, briefly?
Indeed. So this is a very simple axonometric blowing up the building into each of its components. So on the ground floor, there's a large retail or commercial tenancy, and so that takes on part of the health centre, then extends it further to the front, and you've got existing flats in yellow. They're retained, and then along Cranham Street, you've got the green block, which is two more floors of new flats, and then on top of all of that, there's a rooftop extension, which is the blue element. So there's a total of 9 new flats and 8 existing flats within that.
And the 8 existing flats are social housing. Are original people going to move back in?
That's the intention. The exact detail may be worth asking Ian about exactly, but yeah, they're being refurbished and going back to the council.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know whether the same tenants, the original tenants, will move back in. They were certainly given the opportunity, or are given the opportunity to do so. But my guess is, they've probably settled elsewhere, and I know a number of them had children that, by the time they move back again, their schooling might be different. I don't know, but they're retained by Ulster City Council, and we're refurbishing them and improving their energy efficiency, and then handing them back to them. Yeah, that's 5 of the 8.
Do you have much trouble winkling the people out to get, because they were still for sale until really building work began? How easy or difficult was it to persuade people to move?
We didn't get involved in that side of it. Oxford City Council did. Um, this had been a long process, John. We had had public consultations um, and engaged with, the residents of that building for, a year or so prior. So none of this came as a shock, and there was a long lead in. We entered into quite a complicated agreement with Oxford City Council, where we bought the freehold from them, because there's a flying freehold. We'd already bought the ground floor, or most of the ground floor, and then we bought the remaining freehold from Oxford City Council, and then we granted the council back 999-year leases. So that whole process took, a couple of years. And during that time, the residents were obviously told what was going on. So I think everyone had a chance to adjust and find elsewhere, other places to live. So I wasn't aware of it being a particular issue.
You didn't have one resident who refused to move.
No, thank goodness. That would have been awkward if we had had that. No, when it came to the day of delivering up vacant possession, Oxford City Council had done a very, very good job. They'd already happily rehoused the existing residents. I do hope some of them come back, really do, but we'll have to see.
So it's not like the MC2, which has had to diverge around the house,
No.
somewhere up at the moors.
No. And then there are two flats that we own, and then there is one privately owned apartment, and that resident, we have rehoused that landlord's tenant in another one of our properties, and they may well move back again.
Let's go back to the architect's drawing if we can. What's going to be on the ground floor? Commercial property. Can you share some secrets with us? Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Tesco.
Can I divert you briefly, John?
Do, Paul.
Whilst vacant possession was served in time for the builder to start, and I must mention Edgar Taylor in this as a fantastic contractor in making this happen on site. We didn't have access to 6 of the flats prior to starting, and one thing that we like to do is know everything about a building before we're extending it and working on it, and we didn't have that. So it's been a very intensive process since getting the building, of understanding it, having to make some adjustments, and having to slice bits off the building we didn't know we'd needed to. And you would have heard a lot of that work happening in the last few weeks. So, but back to your question, it's a commercial tenancy. I think Ian wants us to move into part of the building.
It'd be perfect.
Ian, can you give us some guidance? Who's going to move into that? Which supermarket or mini market?
John, I knew you were going to ask me this question. Ask me again in a month or so's time, by which time we may have done a deal. But the reality, as of today, we do not have any occupants signed up for that ground floor space. I think it's likely to be 2 spaces. I think the unit, there will be one unit, I think, that will face onto up Walton Street with a return frontage onto Cranham Street, and then there will be a smaller unit further down onto Cranham Street. We've had interest, and all I would say, it is from food retailers. That is all I can say at the moment for the front part of the site. The back part of the site, we haven't started marketing yet. I think in reality, I think it's likely to be some sort of office use. And yeah, it would be perfect studio for you, Paul.
Indeed, yeah.
So in a month's time, you're in a position to tell people in Jericho who is coming in 2023, correct?
If and when we sign a deal with an occupier, then absolutely, I'm happy to share that information. I just can't at the moment.
Okay. Next slide, if we've got another slide, please. So this is what the back of it will look like. This is from the Cranham Street side, isn't it? Is that right, Paul?
Indeed, yeah. So on top of the commercial space, it creates a roof garden, and that's something that St Paul's House has never had. The existing flats don't have any balconies or garden space, so there's a great opportunity to create this podium level amenity space which is available for everyone, all 17 flats to enjoy, and then also thinking about biodiversity enhancements within that.
So will it be gated, this little area?
It's for the sole use of the residents of St Paul's House.
Where will they park cars and bicycles?
So it's a car-free development. So then they won't be parking cars anywhere unless they rent them elsewhere. And there's a total of 50 cycle parking spaces within the development once you get past the gate along Cranham Street. So that there's plenty of cycle storage.
But no car storage. Cars will have to find places elsewhere to park in Jericho, correct?
Yeah, there are 4 parking spaces for the commercial spaces.
But everybody else will have to get there by bus, public transport, or
No, absolutely. It's a car-free development, and that it's as we know, Oxford City Council does not encourage car use or car ownership, and it follows that model.
Paul, are you pleased with what you've seen so far? And indeed, Ian, are you both pleased with how the building's going?
Go on, Paul.
Me, it's been a really. It's fascinating. I don't realise how much time has gone by, but it's been an incredible process and really enjoyable, and working with some amazing people. So, yeah, and in terms of the design, there are some constraints. Working with an existing building, we've taken the best parts of the existing building and used that to inform the extension, and really tried to limit the palette of materials so it suits its location.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, that journey that we went on with Paul, and I have to commend Paul and his team. They have been with us from day one on this, and it had been a planning journey with Oxford City Council and the design review panels and the like. But we genuinely are delighted with what we have consent for, and I get very excited when I come into work. Only yesterday I came in and I saw the crane had arrived, I'm like a little kid really. I love this stage of construction, and again, Edgar Taylor, the builder. They've faced some significant challenges, as have our professional team. But they've overcome them. Needless to say, there's been some significant costs associated with that, but you never really know what you're dealing with until you start to dismantle an older building like this. You never really know all of the engineering challenges until you sort of open up the frame and the skeleton and you see what you're dealing with. I'd like to think, Paul, and I'm touching wood here, that we're through the worst of it now. It normally tends to be in the ground and supporting engineering that causes us problems. And there have been a few challenges, but we'll get them. And
there's one final unknown, which is the pitched roof coming off. Which is
yes, that's true.
That's coming off in June. So that's the only bit that's left that could throw a spanner in the works. But we've been in there rooting around, done a full survey, and we're confident it all works. So.
And the residents of Jericho have been incredible, I have to say. Given the level of disruption and trucks and materials going in and out, blocking the roads and alike, and they have been very, very supportive, and we're very grateful, because building a scheme as intensive as this in such a challenging site is not easy, and we appreciate that we have caused disruption, but people have been very, very supportive and very patient.
When will it be finished? When will we see something approaching an end product?
I think it's March next year, isn't it? It's the program.
So that's a year's time, virtually, and that's the official. That's going to be the official opening of the whole thing.
Fingers crossed.
What sort of people will rent the flats? I mean, I heard it said in Jericho that people like you just come and sell flats which people do get as buy-to-lets, and that's not very healthy. Any
No, well,
reaction to that?
these these flats will not be sold. They will form part of our portfolio. So it was always the intention to create an investment for us here in Jericho. If we were building this just to sell, we wouldn't be spending as much on the building, on the design, and around the sustainability credentials of this building. When we had planning permission, we got planning permission um, with an energy strategy that involved gas boilers and the like. Well, we've gone away from that. It's going to cost us a significant amount of money, extra money that we didn't have to do, but we want to make this as carbon neutral as we possibly can. So there's no gas heating. It's all air source heat pumps and PV and solar. So no, they will be retained by us. Who will rent them? I don't know. It'll be our usual demographic. There will be a mix of different occupiers. Some might share, some may let, but we've got a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units there, and I'm pretty confident that we'll find tenants for them fairly easily.
So if I want to find somewhere for my old age, what do I do? Do I apply to Lucy's now?
Yeah, do it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we 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 have a broad range in our 700 tenants. We have a very broad range of tenants. Some of them have been renting with us for over 50 years, and we've got a number of regulated and assured tenants. And we have applicants who are retirement, and we have very young too. I mean, the beauty of if you rent through Lucy's is we don't sell. So if you wanted a long lease, and you wanted to have security of knowing that you can rent somewhere for a significant amount of time, then that's something that we're in a relatively unique position to be able to offer.
Paul, just before we move on, you've got your own little vision for the boatyard. Have you prepared to share it?
Absolutely. I think, well, the first thing is that the amount of energy and time and money that goes into designing something, and if that's happened 4 times and there've been 4 refusals, I think it's really not an efficient use of energy or anything. So whatever happens next, it must be positive, and I think it must involve the community. So in terms of what I think, it should be a community-led housing scheme, and it should be 100% affordable housing in some way, and car-free, and it should also respect the urban fabric and grain that's there, and just really push the boundaries as an exemplar development within Oxford. So how exactly that happens, I don't know. But
you prepared to lead this? Would you get a consortium together, or would you build a boatyard there?
that's a tricky one, isn't it, with the boatyard? Because you've made the point that there's not been a boat fixed there for a number of years, but I think it's a pretty inherent part of that site, there being a boatyard or some element of being able to maintain boats. So I think that would need to go forward in some way and be part of it, and be part of its unique character.
All right, last question on the boatyard. Plainly, nothing's going to be built for 5 years there. Why don't we turn it into a green space? Why don't we rewild the site to green the boatyard? What would you think about that?
I think, well, the first thought is going to be money, isn't it? It's who's going to pay for it, and what's it going to do to the value of it? That's the trouble. It sounds like an awful lot of money is being paid and put into that site, and we need housing. So I'd be working on that really. We've got Port Meadow, a stone's throw away, and whilst it's nice to think about regreening or greening spaces, I think the need for affordable housing is much greater. It's such a good location.
Let me take you off the hook, because we're going to move on to the visit to your new enterprise. Can you give us a 30-second commercial for Lyrae Spirits? What does it do? Explain to people what what's behind that shop front?
Okay, so Linray Spirit came about of this idea that as architects we should have more influence in and say and get involved in what's happening into the future of our built environment. And traditionally, architects' offices are closed doors or they're hidden away because we like the cheapest rents and things like that, or creative spaces which are generally on the fringe. But my instinct was to just get into the middle of things, have a shop front, and let people come in and connect with them and really make a difference. And in terms of our creative energy and how we see things, we start off with a blank piece of paper and a pencil, and then design something which solves a problem. And we need to be able to share that skill and experience to
When
make
people open the door to your shop, they'll see a whole lot of liqueurs.
Yeah, no.
What's the concept?
So Linrace itself, it sells alcoholic and non-alcoholic spirits, and that's important. It's inclusive, not exclusive, and the idea is that you can come in as an off license and buy some pretty special things from UK producers and some wonderful bars around the country, which started making bottled cocktails through the coronavirus. I've been lucky enough to enjoy those, and I thought, well, I'm going to bring those to Oxford. So there's an off-license element to it. You can buy and take away, or we will be putting on events and talks and enjoying those during the talks and events.
But you're not a cocktail bar.
No, very much not a bar. No, we want to distinguish ourselves not as a bar.
So on May the 4th, I'm bringing something like 15 people to come and sample your cocktails and hopefully buy some bottles of it. So if you want to take part in that, you can register on Universe for that. So how has business been so far? Because you've done some Jericho events in there over the Easter weekend, haven't you?
No, exactly. Easter weekend we had the History of Jericho exhibition, and we had some really, really good discussions and insights into some of the history, which even I didn't know. So we put a large map up on the wall, as well as having some display boards about Jericho and its history. And I've literally, as people were talking, I was marking on there all these different observations and things I didn't know, and I'm going to try and keep that there for as long as possible, or forever, and just build upon it, add more images. And it's possible that back room could become a bit of a history of Jericho, as images and paintings become available. We just start hanging them, and it becomes a really interesting collection and sort of part of the shop. So that's very much a sort of exhibition space. It's currently our meeting room, but that will change over time.
So it's a sort of a mini Jericho museum you see organically developing there. Is that right?
Possibly. Just if it draws people in, and I met some fascinating people over the weekend, manning the shop and the exhibition, and they sought me out, they sought the shop out, and there's the potential of doing some great things in the future. So it's doing what I wanted to do.
May the 4th, if you want to come to that, go onto Universe and register, because there are very few places left. Moving on for May the 4th, and on Thursday, May the 5th, you can see, if he's not in Ukraine, the great John Simpson in St. Barnabas in the evening. So if we could see the slide of John Simpson, please. Oh, sorry, there's something else before. I'm such a busy person. 24th of April, this Sunday, in Mount Place, there's a lazy Sunday. Music, college cruises is open. There's beer, there's German sausages, there's ice cream, there's art. Come along anytime between 12 and 5 this Sunday. Please come along to that. And moving on to John Simpson, if we can, we'll see that John Simpson's appearing on the 5th of May at 6:30, talking about the world today. As you know, he's done 50 years in the BBC. He's what in the trade is called a fireman. He runs towards fire. He doesn't run away from it. He's been in Ukraine in the last week or so. Come along. You have to register on Universe for that, and £5 a person to come in and that goes to the clock fund. The clock is working, but it's still not telling time properly. And on the 12th of May, the great Michael Crick, one of the great journalists of our time, he's just written a wonderful book about Nigel Farage, the history man. And as we know, Nigel Farage is one of the favourite people in these parts of the world. It's he'll be talking about Farage. That's he's written about Geoffrey Archer. He's written about David Butler. He is a superb journalist, and he's on at 6:30 on Thursday, 12th of May. Again, £5 a person. Register on Universe. And finally, Gina Miller, who probably is a heroine in these parts. A woman who took on the government twice and won twice, has set up a new party called the True and Fair Party. And she'll be talking about the B word as well. That was due to be earlier next week, but it's actually gone to the 19th of May at 6:30. So please register for that. Please come to that. There's an awful lot happening. So keep looking at the My Jericho website where you'll find lots of stuff. The other thing is these things do cost money. So if you look down the back of your sofa and can find some money, do send some to this to Lloyds Bank 139626 4851 8460 Jericho Good Works. Any money from down the back of your sofa is gratefully received, and there'll be a proposal to Lucy in the morning. But meanwhile, Ian and Paul, thank you very much indeed. A very interesting hour. Any questions? Put them into Paul in Lynn Race in Walton Street. Thank you very much, and good night. Bye.
Thank you.
Yoo-hoo!